Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a distinct pleasure to welcome you all to the Hague Institute for Global Justice this afternoon for this important event. Following the high-profile launch of the report of the UN Commission of Inquiry on North Korea last month in Geneva, it is a privilege for the Hague Institute to host the Hague launch of this report and to offer a forum for the members of the Commission to engage in dialogue with the diplomatic, policy and academic communities in this, the international city of peace and justice. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our speakers, Judge Michael Kirby, the chairperson of the Commission and a former Justice of the High Court of Australia, and another member of the Commission, Ms. Sonia Biserko, founder and president of the Helsinki Committee for Human Rights in Serbia. I would also like to bid a particular welcome to the ambassadors and the judges who are joining us this afternoon, and to the members of the Korean War Abductees Family Union, who have provided essential assistance in the production of the Commission's report. For those unfamiliar with the organization, it has played an instrumental role in assisting the Commission with its investigation, including through the provision of historical documents. Ladies and gentlemen, both your attendance at this afternoon's event in such great numbers and the continuing media interest in this report, perhaps unprecedented for a commission of inquiry of this nature, underline the quality of the Commission's work and the timely attention it has drawn to the ongoing plight of the North Korean people. The report uniquely presents a systematic evidence of the scale of atrocities being committed in North Korea, totaling some 400 pages of linked reports and supporting documents based on first-hand testimony from victims and witnesses. This report is being launched in The Hague as well as in Geneva, traditionally known as an International Center for Human Rights, demonstrates not only our city's continuing salience in matters related to peace and justice, but also serves as a reminder of its relevance for the work being carried out by institutions here in The Hague. Few such reports have so stark a recommendation as this one, that the country's leaders face charges of crimes against humanity at the International Criminal Court, including systematic extermination, torture, rape, forced abortions, and starvation. Underpinning this recommendation is the Commission's finding that the gravity, scale, and nature of these violations reveal a state that does not have any parallel in the contemporary world. The Human Rights Council, which commissioned the report in 2013, is now charged with acting to ensure that the international community remains seized with the matter, even as other world events demand our attention. Judge Kirby formally presented the report to the body earlier this week, and those states have, to some extent, adopted traditional positions. The light that has been shed on the reality of the human rights situation in North Korea cannot be easily extinguished. The report remains a clarion call to action. The Hague Institute, a young and vibrant think and do tank with a mandate to undertake research, convene experts, and provide trainings on issues at the intersection of peace, security, and justice, is privileged to provide a venue for the launch of this historic report. We stand ready to assist the Commission in its public engagement efforts. I would now like to introduce the chairperson of the Commission, Judge Kirby, to discuss the mandate, methodology, and principal findings of the Commission's report before engaging in a discussion with his colleague. You have Judge Kirby's biography in your packets, which highlights his extraordinary career as an Australian and international jurist. But let me also say that there could be no more powerful advocate for human rights and a more principled defender of the North Korean people. It is a personal pleasure to welcome him to our stage today. Judge Kirby, you have the floor.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Williams. And Dr. Williams has permitted me to have a bit of a wander here because I've spent all my life sitting on a bench and not being able to walk around. So now that I am liberated in my newfound role, Dr. Williams has allowed me to have a little walk amongst you because this is a wonderful thing that you have come here today. Thank you for coming here. Thank you for coming here and bearing witness to the sufferings of the Korean people. And note that I say the Korean people on both sides of the border. The Korean people have greatly suffered. And it's as if in the north a kind of national nervous breakdown has occurred. And we, the people of the world, must be engaged, must be concerned about how we change the situation that exists at the moment, because that situation is intolerable. It is truly intolerable, as demonstrated by the report of the Commission of Inquiry. Thank you for having us in this Global Institute in The Hague. Thank you for having us in this lovely room with the blue, the colour of the United Nations, the colour that our planet takes on. If you look at our little, tiny, insignificant, unimportant planet in the middle of the enormity of the universe, the colour that it has is blue. If you look at the outside and look back at us, we are a little blue planet. And the blue is the colour that the United Nations took on as the colour of the United Nations family. And on this lovely spring day, I'm told that this is the weather that is always present in The Hague, that it's a special city with wonderful weather. And I would believe that if I were a naive Australian coming from the other side of the world. But in fact, I have lived for 45 years in a Netherlands household. And you might ask, how does that happen? Well, it happens because my partner, Johan van Vleuten, was actually born in The Hague. He was born in The Hague and within a few weeks of my birth, and his family and my family are here today. So I would like, if you will permit me, just this little digression to honour first the family of my partner, Johan van Vleuten, who has been such a profound influence in my life. Second, The Hague, which is the world centre of international law and has many wonderful institutes and academies that are concerned with spreading the essential idea that you can't have universal human rights unless you have the rule of law. It's the rule of law that underpins, guarantees, and ultimately, where need be, enforces the rule of international human rights law. And thirdly, I would like to acknowledge the people of the Netherlands. The people of the Netherlands, I think, have a special capacity to understand the predicament of the people of North Korea because of the great sufferings that the people of the Netherlands themselves underwent during occupation, during wartime, and I honour the people of the Netherlands in so many ways for being willing to stand up for true equality and justice for everyone, no exceptions, everyone. Now, as Dr. Williams has said, the Commission of Inquiry on North Korea was created by resolution of the Human Rights Council in March last year, and thereby hangs a tale, because normally when a body such as a Commission of Inquiry is established, there is a vote. Always there is a vote. And there are those who disagree with establishing the Commission of Inquiry. But on this one unique, rare occasion, there was no vote. If you can look at it online, actually, and see the president, Dr. Herzl, the Polish ambassador, he paused, he waited longer to see if there was a call for a vote. Some countries do not agree with country-specific inquiries, and yet the call for the vote did not occur. Now, why was that so? It didn't occur because, I believe, for two reasons. First, that the international community had had enough. Enough is enough. And they were generally of a very strong opinion that something had to be done and a commission of inquiry had to be created. And secondly, the countries which normally supported North Korea had begun to melt away. They'd melted away because even they could not bring themselves to express dissent from the establishment of the Commission of Inquiry. Though there are still countries which favour and support North Korea, and there are countries, including great and powerful countries, which do not favour country-specific mandates, nonetheless we were created. Sonja Baserko, my distinguished colleague from Serbia, who is one of the commissioners, and Marzuki Darusman, the former Attorney General of Indonesia, who is the ongoing special rapporteur for human rights abuses in North Korea. He can't be here today, but we three were appointed by the President of the Council in May of 2013, but we didn't really take up office until June 2013, and therefore when I hear people say, this body has been working for a year to produce this report, would that it had been so, but we had to produce our report in time to be delivered in March, as it was this week in Geneva. So it had to be done, and if you then work backwards from that for the translations, then you're talking about the end of 2013. So we had effectively 6 months within which to produce the report. One scholar said to me this week, I said, what was the downside of the Commission of Inquiry? He said, you should have had more time. I'm not so sure about that. I don't know if you find this in your lives, but sometimes when you don't have much time, you can get your report done more effectively by concentrating in your mind. Does anybody here feel that way? I certainly feel that because we didn't have much time, we had to be super efficient. And we had to face immediately a particular problem that North Korea would not allow us in. We didn't expect them to allow us in, but we kept asking. We kept asking right to the end. We kept writing to them and asking. We wrote 10 times asking for engagement, but 10 times they either refused and said we're against country-specific mandates, or they ignored. However, we then had to somehow get convincing evidence without being able to get to the country concerned. And the answer to that was a strong decision of the commissioners within days of our starting up that we would have a public hearing system. We would have a technique of having public hearings around the periphery of this country in order to secure testimony which could be recorded and could be filmed and could be available online. And so that was our answer. It cannot be that a country can say, we will not agree to the United Nations system and the Human Rights Council establishing an inquiry, and we are going to ignore it, and therefore you are delegitimised. Sadly, some of the ambassadors in Geneva of the group that support North Korea were saying just that this week. But it cannot be. It is not that way in our own countries. You can't have an accused, for example, saying, well, I don't accept the legitimacy and I'm not going to have any engagement. In our own municipal jurisdiction, that's not the end of the matter. You then get on with it and you get the best possible evidence you can get. We had no difficulty getting evidence. There are 26,000 refugees of North Korea in South Korea, 26,000. And we, in the end, had to cut off our testimony because of the fact that we just had too much and we had to get our report written and we had to do the analysis. And so we set up the public hearings. And I think that was one of the best innovations. It has been done at least once before when Judge Goldstone did the inquiry into the occupied territories. But he had difficulty getting into Israel, and therefore it was a sort of semi-success. But I think it was a complete success in the inquiry into North Korea. And to the allegation by North Korea that why would you accept just the testimony of these renegades and human scum, they call them. Why would you accept just the one side of the story? The answer comes back, have a look for yourselves. Anyone in the world, that is to say anyone in the world except DPRK, can have access to the internet, bring up the Commission of the Council on Human Rights, have a look at the website, and then go straight to our public hearings. You can judge. Now, my own belief is, and what I suggest to you is, if you look, you will also get the feeling that increasingly was brought home to us that the witnesses were truth tellers. They were telling the truth. There's something about great suffering, that where people suffer greatly, this is borne out in Holocaust studies, that if they suffer greatly, they want to get it off their chest. They want to talk about it. They want to explain why they have survived and others who have not. And they want to bear witness for those who haven't survived or who have suffered greatly and cannot speak. And so we had in all a very large number of witnesses, all of whom we interviewed, but some of them would not take part in the public hearing, so we saw them in private. But 84 of them said, yes, we will front the public hearings. And they came forward and they talked of forced abortions, of rapes, of refoulement from China, of people sent back into North Korea to gruesome punishments. They talked about the political prison camps, which North Korea denies, but which are affirmed by the testimony and by satellite imagery. And they talked about the Great Famine, of the arduous march, the great suffering of the Korean people, unnecessary suffering at the time when 1 million of their fellow citizens were perishing from hunger and malnutrition and lack of food. They were purchasing not only the usual range of luxury goods for the elite, but more significantly, very expensive MiG aircraft, which came on the market from the former Soviet states, which they were purchasing, and other rocket and like equipment reported only in the last 2 weeks by the panel of the Security Council. The type of expenditures that are involved are extremely great, and that was at a time when they could not feed their population. The abduction issue is a very real issue and very live in Japan. The large numbers of Japanese nationals and other nationals who, in a piratical act of breach of international law, North Korea have simply abducted. Megumi Yokota in Japan, a young girl of 13 who went to badminton practice, and she left with her school friends and she didn't turn up at home. You can imagine what the parents felt waiting for Megumi to come home. 7:30 passed, 8 o'clock passed, 8:15, desperate phone calls. And Megumi, yes, she'd left. We don't know where she is, Mrs. Megumi. Mrs. Yokota, we don't know where she is. And she was on her way to North Korea, apparently for a cause so trivial as being able to interpret modern idiom so that those who were being trained as spies could learn the latest ways of expressing language in Japan. No respect for the Yokota family or for Megumi. Interestingly, this very weekend in Mongolia, the Yokota family went and met for the first time in Mongolia, which is a kind of haven in this story. They met their grandchild, and that is a good thing, but it's not enough. It's a crumb. Many crumbs are offered from North Korea, but they're not enough. Now, the Council on Human Rights asked us 4 questions. Are there crimes against international human rights law that reach the standard of reasonable grounds? That was the first question. Secondly, do those crimes, or any of them, rise to the level of a crime against humanity, one of the great crimes against humankind, which has been recognised in the decade, certainly since the Second World War? Thirdly, if so, who are accountable for those crimes? And fourthly, how can we render them accountable? It's very important to tell you those 4 questions because we've had some people, including some very considerable important scholars, who've suggested, well, maybe you could have been a little bit more subtle, or maybe you could have tried to find a way to get Korea. You're not going to get North Korea on board if you're talking about accountability. We had no option. We were asked to answer a question. Are there these crimes? And if so, how can we render them accountable? Now, our answers to those questions were, yes, there are many crimes and there are many offences against universal human rights, and there's plenty of evidence. Second, a number of them do rise to a crime against humanity. They are crimes of awful violence against a section of the community as a matter of state policy and practice, which results in serious suffering by a group, an identifiable group in the community. So there were crimes against humanity, yes. Thirdly, are there people who can be identified as accountable? Yes, there are people. Some of them we did not know their names, but we could identify by reference to office holding and the time who was responsible for the terrible crimes, particularly starvation of populations of 3 generations of a person's family sent into the political prison camps, living on rodents and on grass. The old didn't survive. They couldn't bring themselves to live in that way. The young could survive. They had the genetic and desperate need to adapt. But I remember the witness who said that. He fixed me with a very, very sharp eye and said, the older people didn't survive because they couldn't adapt, but the younger people did survive. So the answer to that question was, yes, there is a need for accountability. Now, how do we get accountability? That is a big puzzle. We went through the options. What about a Truth and Reconciliation Commission? No Mandela or de Klerk in North Korea. What about a special tribunal like the ICTY? Well, that is also likely generally to require the Security Council, and the international community may not be in the mood to spend the money and set up such a body. What about having a prosecutor who can be appointed without a particular tribunal simply to gather the evidence? We did suggest that there should be an ongoing mechanism once the Commission of Inquiry finishes at the end of this month within the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to continue the work of gathering the testimony so that in due course of time there can be action to render people accountable. So that, if it's adopted by the Human Rights Council and the High Commissioner and the funds are available, that will continue to be done. But then we thought that is not enough. There ought to be accountability for these gross crimes. I challenge the members of this audience to read the report. It is made the more powerful and readable because on every second page there is a quote in the actual language of those who have suffered to speak directly. It is not ministered through the Commission. It is the exact quote of what people said, illustrating the point, and it allows the victims to speak directly to you. And so we were resolved that there should be accountability, and we believe that the International Criminal Court is the best placed mechanism because it is established, it has a prosecutor, it has a staff. What it doesn't presently have is jurisdiction. North Korea has not itself signed on to the Rome Statute, and to get a matter before the ICC, you would have to have a resolution of the Security Council, which is empowered exceptionally to refer a matter to the ICC. The Security Council has a precedent here. It did this in the respect of Darfur in 2005. So it has been done, it can be done, and in the view of the Commission of Inquiry, it ought to be done. People say, well, China will just veto that, or somebody will veto it, and therefore you're wasting your time. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure of that. And in any case, sometimes in life, you have to take a position of principle. Sometimes, even if you will fail, you must take a position of principle. I remember my great teacher of international law, Professor Julius Stone, would often say to me in the language of the Talmud scholars, it is not given to any generation of humankind to solve all the wrongs of the world, but neither are we released from our obligation to try. And I think that that is an important question which will have to be addressed in the weeks and months to come. It is not given to us to solve every question immediately, but neither is it given to us to fail to try. And the report of the Commission of Inquiry, readable, concise, 300 to 400 pages, is not a long report on the agonies of North Korea. It is a short report, but it is digested, it is compressed, and more importantly, and most unusually, respectfully, for a United Nations document, it is readable. And I hope it will get into the minds of citizens of good countries who will speak up for it and insist on action. At the Human Rights Council this week, 37 of the member countries spoke up in favour specifically of referral to the ICC. And that is an amazing array of countries. Many of them are the countries of the former Soviet bloc. The ambassador for Albania said, we know about this, we've been there, we know these things, we've experienced this. And she told the Human Rights Council that Albania supported strongly the proposal for referral to the International Criminal Court. And so that is where we stand, and it's going to be extremely interesting and illuminating and important to watch what follows from here, because this is a testing time. This is a moment of truth. And for those of us who, like in the spirit of this institute, are committed to universal justice and human rights in the global community, it is going to be a very important moment in the life of international law and practice. That's it.
Yes.
Big round of applause.
Well, thank you very much, Judge Kirby, for that lucid presentation on the mandate, the methodology, and the principal findings of the Commission's report. Let me just follow up, perhaps, on an issue which you underline, the importance of accountability. And you said that the ICC is the best placed mechanism to ensure accountability, notwithstanding the 37 countries which, of course, supported referral to the ICC, as you've said, in the deliberations of the Human Rights Council. It's not sort of a unanimous view within the Council. What are the realistic prospects of ICC involvement now or in the future?
You would understand that I don't want to say anything or even to move or twitch an eye muscle that would in any way interfere with the fulfilment of the recommendation of the Commission. It is important to preface what I'm going to say in answer to the question to understand that this is a very important but not the only recommendation of the Commission of Inquiry. If you look at media coverage, the matter that in the celebrity world of media, the focus on individuals and particular people, the matter that got a lot of attention was the letter to the Supreme Leader of North Korea, in which he was warned that possibly he might himself be responsible, either directly or as a person who is guilty of the international crime of aiding and abetting crimes against humanity, if he has the power to stop the ongoing wrongs and crimes and doesn't do it. Now, some people said, you had a bit of a hide, didn't you, writing a letter like that? Certainly, it had never been done before. But, you know, as the great judge in England, Lord Denning, used to say, if we always pause and never do anything for the first time, nothing will ever be done and no progress will ever be made. We felt it was our duty to express what is the position in international law. Those who have responsibility and who don't exercise power to prevent crimes against humanity may themselves be responsible in international law. And the fact is that in North Korea, all lines draw together in the person who is the supreme leader of the country, the head of the Korean Workers' Party, the head of the Korean People's Army, the head of the Internal Security Agency, and the chief guru and movie star of the country. So that all of these are reasons why we wrote the letter and gave the warning. Now, what is likely to happen in the weeks ahead? One possibility is that the members of the Commission of Inquiry who will otherwise demit office at the end of the month might be invited to come and give a briefing to the Security Council or the members of the Security Council who want to know. I would certainly welcome that, because that would mean we would be in a position to explain how important and how unique this is. There are a lot of countries which abuse human rights in our world. But it's the combination, the collection, the duration, the intensity, the totalitarian nature of the society. Government is not content to control the bodies of the citizens. It wants to get into the minds and control the minds and the feelings of the citizens. And so all of this makes it unique. Will anything come of it? Well, I think it's a matter of watching this space. And I am far from convinced that it is pointless. China is a very great country, and with a great and ancient civilization, with a huge economy, and China is itself making, partly through its economic advancement, great advances in human rights. Therefore, I'm far from convinced that China will necessarily be an impediment to the actions which the Commission of Inquiry has proposed. But I think we've just got to be patient. Media always wants everything to be solved today. We want to know today what's going to happen. Well, the answer to that is we just don't know, and I don't think anyone knows yet. And there's still the time for the debates, the dialogue and the negotiations. And they are going on at the moment in Geneva as the resolution of the Human Rights Council is being negotiated. And I would think that is going to be a very strong resolution if there is any reflection of the debates I heard on Monday when we presented our report. And then there will be a possible move to New York and consideration, perhaps both by the Security Council and the General Assembly. All of this is an unfolding tale. And I would hope that this institute can play a part in, as really a uniquely well-placed multidisciplinary body that brings together people from all the continents and is confronting this new and unique situation. There would be few that would be better placed to put their very intelligent thinking caps on and assist the international community to come to a resolution. Doing nothing is not acceptable. It is not acceptable. And I believe that is what the international civil society is going to say and what the diplomatic and political actors must hear.
Let me turn to Ms. Bisako, and on the point that Judge Kirby just made, that China will not necessarily be an impediment to the implementation of the Commission's recommendations. But China has said that the report and its recommendations are divorced from reality. That was the response we had this week. What are the prospects of improving the human rights situation in North Korea without movement from China?
Well, it's true that China has been the main impediment in dealing with North Korea so far, because China is supporting North Korea to survive now, and is really the main country which is providing her existence. But on the other hand, they're also highly frustrated by North Korean behavior. It's very intimidating for China in many occasions. So one would say that over the time they might accommodate or soften their attitudes, because they themselves are starting to participate in human rights dialogue worldwide in the international bodies. So I wouldn't at this moment judge their stance as a definite one. So it is really more complex, and it very much depends on the geopolitics which is very present in the region, for many reasons that are known. So I would say that things have some prospects to be changed in near future. On the other hand, we have new crises emerging in the world, and the world is becoming really a very unsafe place. So I hope that in this effort to stabilize the world, China will be obliged to play a more constructive role.
And just as a follow-up, a number of diplomats have suggested that the possibility of the Security Council taking up this issue are smaller than ever, particularly with the Ukraine crisis diverting international attention. If that's the case, are there other useful measures that the Human Rights Council could take, short of referring the matter to the UN Security Council?
Well, the whole idea to have a Security Council engaged in this exercise is really to elevate the level and to engage the supreme body of the UN in this whole affair. But as you mentioned, Ukraine may kidnap the attention of the world, But I think, despite that, that North Korea is something that has to be closed, as the Balkans as well. And maybe they can profit both these regions in speeding up international involvement in finally providing solutions for these regions, because Ukraine is really becoming central, and it's affecting not only Ukraine-Russian relations, but also East European, South European, Black Sea region, and so on. So they need to close certain points in the world arena in order to be able to address this very crucial problem at this moment, because it's really violating many of the international law criteria, and it's taking world into totally uncertain direction. And I think it's very much needed at this point to have this diplomatic effort, first of all, to come to a conclusion on certain points in order to have the energy for the Ukraine problem, which is really problem of principle of international law, not only whether Crimea will stay or not with Ukraine.
Well, I know that the members of our audience are really keen to engage in a dialogue with you, and we have, I think, roving mics. So why don't I give you an opportunity to pose questions. Just give us your name and your institutional affiliation.
Just whilst we're waiting for the first question, could I make one suggestion that could perhaps be pursued by this institute? It was an aspect of the issues that really we were not in a good position to ourselves explore. And this really relates to the interrelationship of peace and security and universal human rights. The Charter, of course, in its opening words, recognises the integration by referring to the objects of the United Nations as including the achievement of international peace and security and universal human rights. We took a view early on that peace and security was the Security Council's bailiwick, and that our purpose was to address the issues that were the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council's bailiwick. But in all truth, looked at one way, nuclear weapons in the hands of a country which is seriously disrespectful of its own population and which has had 1 million of 23 million perish in a recent famine. This is a very unstable situation for the world, and maybe this institute could have value added by exploring, first of all, the theoretical paradigm of what is the relationship between universal human rights and peace and security, and secondly, in the context of North Korea, how does that interrelationship make the Security Council concerned about and with a legitimacy and obligation concerning this report? Because this is not just an ordinary report. Somebody asked me today in the media, where would you place this? And I said, in terms of the Richter scale, this is 10. This is right up the top. This is unique, and we will never have another opportunity like this to address it. And putting it correctly into the United Nations machinery, I think, is an intellectual and a practical challenge, but it's also an intellectual challenge. Anyway, it's just a little thought.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, this is one of the reasons for convening these events, both, of course, to provide a platform for outstanding jurists, civil society leaders like yourselves to address key issues on the international agenda, but also to give us some guidance as to the kind of work that this young and vibrant Think and Do tank can be doing. And I would say certainly we are distinguishing ourselves here in The Hague by focusing on issues at the critical intersection of peace, security, and justice, of course, including human rights. So this would be certainly one of the issues we would certainly consider. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. It's Qiao Conghui from China doing my PhD research with the Netherlands School of Human Rights Research. My question is to Mr. Kirby. Since several scholars, such as Professor Thomas Watt, argue that the time has come to consider alternatives to legal mechanisms to protect the human rights. And taking the situation in DPRK, for example, unique as you described, which is totally dominated by the Kim family and shows little willingness to react, not even to the report, not to mention the possible special tribunal. Do you think that would be more efficient if several other possibilities, such as political negotiation or the economic corporations, would work in favor of the enhance of the human rights in South Korea, such as Kansas City, which is located between the DPRK and the South Korea border, where the family law stores are already allowed to develop. Would you think that is a more efficient possibility? Thank you.
I suppose the legally correct answer is we are not really engaged in political negotiations. And in fact, it would be an excess of our mandate and of our jurisdiction and an incorrect thing for us to get involved in that. I had no trouble, having been a judge of a final court in a nation state which is a member of the United Nations, accepting a rather humble job. Basically, it's a humble job. It's to make findings on 4 questions. And it is not our role to say what must be done. We have no right to do that. We make findings. Yes, there are human rights abuses. Yes, some of them are crimes against humanity, or arguably so. A prosecutor might so find. Yes, people are accountable, and yes, something should be done, and the institution that fits best is the ICC. But basically our job was to make the findings and then leave it to the diplomats and the representatives of nation states. Just as in our own countries, in Australia, we have about 5 royal commissions running at the moment, gathering information on matters as diverse as the organisation of the trade union movement and child abuse in church schools. And so what they do, they reach their conclusions, and then it's up to the political process to carry it forward. And so it is now. And in a theoretical way, I can be completely disinterested in a sense of having lived for 6 or 7, 8 months with this issue. I'm not completely uninterested, but I'm disinterested. It really belongs to others to take it forward. And I would not at all despair. I think the fact that there was no vote, the fact that none of the countries that traditionally supported North Korea said the call for a vote, I think that was a very significant moment. It's never happened before, and it may never happen again. But it does show that the world understands. China cannot be happy about having on its immediate border a country which has nuclear weapons, has the 4th largest army in the world, and which it solved recently a political dispute between the supreme leader and his uncle, Jang Sung-tek, said to be the 2nd most important man or the 3rd most important man in the country, by arresting him in a most humiliating way at the Politburo, dragging him out of the room. If ever you saw an un-Asian act, that was it. And then putting him before a military tribunal where the judges, so-called judges, were reported as denouncing him as a traitor, a man who dreamed impermissible dreams. That was what he was alleged to have done. He dreamed impermissible dreams. And then executing him within a space of 4 days. Well, what sort of a stability does that talk of? And so China can't be happy about this situation, and the question will be, how does one translate that? You can look across the northern rivers from DPRK into China, a blaze of lights, shops, cars. You can see the other world. And if you look from a satellite in at the peninsula at night, the South Korea is a blaze of lights. China is a blaze of lights. And then there's this dark, dark space in between. The job of the Commission was to shine a bright light. And then it's the job of others to say where that leads.
I think actually we'll take perhaps 3 questions, because I'm conscious of the time, and then ask the panelists to respond. So just make it brief, and we'll have 2 more.
Thank you very much. My name is Haemin Kim.
I can't hear it, I'm sorry. You
sorry.
have to speak close to the microphone and right into it.
Yeah. My name is
Otherwise
Haemin Kim from the Hague Institute for Global Justice. And I thank you very much for the great work of the Commission as a person from the Korean Peninsula. And I personally think that this report bears exceptional significance from an aspect that it includes recommendations not only for the state concerned, but only for the international community as a whole and for the key neighboring states. My question is, recently the U.S. Special Envoy for the North Korean human rights issues expressed his view that the 6-party talks would not include human rights agenda to their own denuclearization agenda. So considering that the report recommends to form a human rights contact group, including the framework of 6-party talks as one of its stakeholders, and also considering that the report recommends to take the Helsinki process as an example, how would the Commission view about, let's say, this separation approach to human rights and other issues, whether it could be reconciled with the Commission's recommendations or not? That is all. Thank you.
Is there another question? Ah, yes. Oh, okay.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Serge Brammertz, a prosecutor from the ICTY. In a previous job, I had also the opportunity to work for the Hariri Investigation Commission in Lebanon, so I've also some experience with UN Investigation Commission. So my question is, what do you think about the support the UN and the Geneva office gave to your work as head of an investigation commission? We all know that this debate is a very ongoing one. How strong is the UN system in supporting a short-term investigation commission? So I would be very much interested in what you think about the readiness and the efficiency of the UN as a system to support important investigation commissions as yours. Thank you.
Good. And then a 3rd question. Then we can.
Very good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Khalid Ahmed Chaudhry from International Human Rights Commission. At the start of your speech, you mentioned Second World War. A couple of years ago, I was standing on the tower near the Berlin Wall, and I felt deep pain in my heart. One single nation and tyranny of divide. Forgive me if I asked you a question, not specifically human right, but a nation's right. Will there be ever any possibility for the international community to play a role for the reunification of Korea? Knowingly that present regime, North Korean regime, is extremely repressive, but the people on the both sides of the border share the same values, same culture, same history. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So,
well, first of all, in relation to the first question, I think maybe in the eye of history, the most important thing that the Commission of Inquiry on North Korea demonstrated was a matter that didn't really ultimately affect North Korea as such, but was concerned with our methodology and with our demonstration that you cannot exclude yourself. I think that's a very important, and the way we took the testimony, put it online, acted throughout in a very transparent manner, I think that was a very important contribution to the potential success of future commissions of inquiry across the board. No longer can people hide simply by not cooperating. As to the six-party talks, in our recommendations is a recommendation concerning bringing an end to the Korean War. A lot of people don't know the Korean War was never brought to an end by a treaty. It's simply an armistice. And we all know what goes wrong when there's just an armistice. And the Korean situation has never been finally resolved. And so that's something which definitely should be done. Has the United States been supporting? Yes, the United States has been supporting. Its statement this week in Geneva was a strongly supporting statement. And I believe even as we meet, there are steps being taken in which the United States is playing a constructive role. It has to show a degree of care because it is seen as the most hostile of the hostile forces. Even the huge quantity of food aid that was given by the United States in bags which had US aid on it, that they had to be disguised or to be presented to the Korean people as reparations paid by the United States for the great evil of the attacks of the United States on the population. They were subjected to the obligation to repay in this way. All of this is in our report. But in terms of the support from the United Nations, well, first of all, the United Nations and the High Commissioner was very much behind the proposal to establish such a commission of inquiry, and the High Commissioner did us the great benefit of providing us with a fantastic secretariat. We could not have achieved what we achieved without a good team, bringing in a report on time, in budget, unanimous, and with excellent material. One of the most interesting aspects of the material is the way we were able to reach out, and they're footnoted, to the behind-the-scenes negotiations between Kim Il-sung and Joseph Stalin. Nowadays, you can get access to a lot of material, to the reports from the ambassador for the DDR in North Korea back to Berlin concerning what the excesses of the personality cult and so on. Very interesting material. But has the United Nations been supporting us? I believe we can say, yes, it has. The proof of the pudding may lie ahead in the next few months, but I see no reason to believe that there has not been a strong commitment by the United Nations, and certainly in the Office of the High Commissioner. I have also to say that High Commissioner Navi Pillay has herself been an exponent of this transparency, of engagement with media. Media can be a very angry tiger, and you have to be careful of it. But media can also be a way of reaching out and can become a way by which victims can reach out to people everywhere. Now, the third question was any possibility, would you remind me? I'm sorry?
Possibility of reunification.
Oh, possibility of reunification. Of course there will be reunification. Of course there will be reunification. Both sides of the Korean divide say there will be reunification, but on their terms. And you have to be a very cautious person in dealing with the propaganda on both sides of the Korean divide. It's very interesting and revealed in a marvellous chapter in our report, written by Christine Chung, the first draft by Christine. Every word of that report was gone through word by word by the commissioners. But Christine wrote the chapter on history, and it reveals the way in which the arguments about the divide, there's no argument about unification. It's just a question of how and when. And I believe that is the truth of the matter. Look at the flow of history. How can there be any doubt that there will ultimately be reunification? One of the troubling things is in South Korea, the young do not seem to be as engaged with the issues of reunification. And in some ways, they like to think of North Korea as something different, and they can get on with their lives in the South. And we have to try and change that. There has to be a commitment on both sides to the reunification issue.
Ms. Biseko, would you like to add any points on the three questions which were posed? Or or any of the 3 points,
well,
the
I
support
just
of
wanted
the UN
to refer
reunification?
to the question by Mr. Bramett, whether the UN can respond to these recommendations and conclusions. I think it's we are confronting a very complicated, complex international situation and international relations, and it started already in 80s with the collapse of bipolar world. Then we went into unipolar, and now we are facing really what it is all about, multipolar world, which needs adjustments and I would say a lot of maturity and hard work to reach to the point where UN will really play a role as it was envisaged by its founders. And I think that international criminal laws were exactly one line of taking international community to the point to establish this, how should I say, international law which would be adequately implemented in all similar situations. ICTY, the Rwanda court, then many others which were in place in the meantime, and ICC as a result of all this. There is no reason not to believe that some kind of mechanism will be established in the case of North Korea. So I see it really as a process, and this report I understand as a great contribution to this process, first of all as a foundation for reflecting how to deal with the situation, whether it will be ICC or any other kind of mechanism. It is up to member states and also UN experts to come up with some solution. But in general, I would say that we all participate now these years, in a very, how should I say, challenging process in establishing rule for the entire world. So I think it's something that is, how to say, umbrella for everything that will come. And I really feel that this report is one of the benchmarks for the future similar situation, because it is so outstanding and so unusual for what we had before, because it came up with some standards which are now, as we can see by all reactions that we have seen over the last week and previously, is something novel in the way in treating such critical situations.
Okay. Well, I know there'll be, we're sure we could go on for much longer and lots of other questions, but I'm conscious that Judge Kirby and Ms. Biseko, you have another engagement in the city. So let me, just one. Okay, let's take one final question from.
Thank you. My name is Ogwon Kwon. I'm a judge at the ICTY. As a Korean national, I also like to express my sincere gratitude to you and all the members of Commission for their hard work. As Judge Kirby is talked about it, one of the sections deals with abduction and enforced disappearance. But to me, it seems to be related what took place after the Korean War, which ended in 1953. So my question is whether the Commission had by any chance an opportunity to consider the issue of Korean prisoner of wars who were captured during the Korean War and never returned to South Korea after the war.
Well, I was sad to see departing two members of the Korean abductees, family of abductees who've been here the whole time, but they just left, no doubt, to go to the airport for the events in London tomorrow, to which we will soon have to go. Yes, there is a substantial section in the report on the two bodies of South Korean nationals who were abducted. First, the prisoners of war, and there was a footnote of the conversation between Joseph Stalin and Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung said, we told them in the South that we had 7,500, but actually we've got 35,000. That was duplicity has been there for a very long time, now increasingly revealed by the materials available from the archives of the former Soviet Union. And the second group are not prisoners of war, but civilians, about the same number. There's some dispute about the numbers, but it's 150,000 all up of prisoners of war not returned, contrary to the armistice agreement, and civilians grabbed because it was thought that they would be useful to the regime in the north. Just indifferent to the pain and the misery, and some of the most powerful evidence we received was from those who were the victims of these abductions. Could I just seize this moment to say in one sentence 3 matters that we've referred to in our report that have not received the attention they should have received, including from the media. The first is women. I mean, in the way that often happens, this is put at the bottom of the pile. The abuse, the trafficking, the violence, the rape, the forced abortions, a very important part of our report. And it doesn't tend to get much attention. And it would itself be a subject that would be worthy of the attention of this institute. Second, Christians. Now, you can have whatever view you like about religion. I don't care. I have very constructive dialogue with my partner. He's against it. I'm for it. But the Christian population at partition was something of the order of 23% of the population. This is DPRK figures. But now it's 0.016%, DPRK figures. They have been abused, they have been terrorised, they have been executed, and it's a real affront to human rights, which include the right to hold your own religion. And no one talks about it. No media is interested in it. Why is that so? The third is the long list of possible practical person-to-person issues, sister city agreements. Why can't the dentists of North Korea meet the dentists of South Korea? What possible security implication could there be in this? In Ireland, where my forebears came from, all island discussions are often very helpful ways of easing the path into realising these are not monsters. And there are a lot of things at the end of our report, including an institution to keep collecting the stories. And I commend those to you. These have not received any attention, and they deserve it.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Judge Kirby and Ms. Biseko, for being with us at the Hague Institute this afternoon. I would also like to thank you for shining a bright light on the human rights situation in North Korea. And this light, as I said, will not be easily extinguished. Judge Kirby will particularly appreciate your strong endorsement of the Institute's work and the practical recommendations which you have given to us for future areas of our work. I should just note that on the issue of women, this is a cross-cutting issue, and gender is a cross-cutting issue of our work, which was one of the first decisions that our supervisory board and the advisory council made last year, and we're even considering the possibility of having
on the agenda of the Security Council, as you know.
Absolutely, a major conference possibly later on this year. So thank you very much for for being with us today, and we certainly hope that the members of the international community and the member states, despite political expediency, will take the action which you've recommended, and this is important. It is important for moral reasons. It is right, and it's also right politically, because you cannot have long-term political stability unless the human rights of all peoples, including the peoples of North Korea, are respected. So join me in thanking Judge Kirby and Ms. Bisako.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan. Thank you.